Yeah, I think that can be a segue, Ida. Um, but after you said the details, no need to record that part, I guess. But so one of the interesting things, so I think I'll start with out of all of that, and then also kind of comparing it to my experience, and then what's interesting is that every single person that listens to this will be able to compare it to their experience because everybody experiences challenges. So one of the things that I have adopted as a point of logic, and a point of logic in your practice can be if we look at the even basic alignment, a point of logic can be, it's not really a mantra, right? Because a mantra, if we're just being, this is just a way of categorizing things. We don't have to be super strict about it, but a mantra is typically something that's going to be a little bit repetitive. Like there is no spoon. It's not the spoon that bends, it's only yourself. Or even shorter, there is no spoon. There is no spoon, right? So that's more of a mantra, but the voice of power, and I think I definitely touched on this in the book, it can kind of begin as a voice of logic and reason and deduction and reminding yourself of the dynamic of what's occurring. Because as we have talked about before, sometimes logic can help redirect emotion. It doesn't prevent it, it doesn't push against it necessarily, but it can kind of like cut through it. It feels like maybe um I don't know, I imagined like clouds or something like that, and then something kind of just moving, and then the clouds are just separating around it. Or I also imagine like a ship breaking ice, and then the ice just kind of breaking around it. So one of the things about challenges is that they can always be opportunities to learn. Opportunity, and this is the logic. So we're all going to experience them. So how should we interact with them? Do we interact with them for me? Do we interact with them, I'm going to try to control this, I'm going to make sure that this never happens again, and more manipulation and things like that? Do we just go below the threshold of active recognition and just go straight back to habits, and maybe in some period after all of the activity we can reflect backwards, but that's the hindsight looking back. So I think one of the first things is being able to use this voice of logic in your practice and reminding yourself of what you're doing while you're doing it, which direction is most likely going to be the best or the most beneficial direction of attention for you, and things like that. So that's definitely one of the things that I did. Experiencing challenges this week, a little bit different, of course, Ida, not as well. There was some safety because Shayna was traveling and stuff like that, but yours is um, tied fundamentally to the safety of the person that you care about. So yeah, the stimuli, the way that we respond to that is going to be proportional to the degree of attachment, and that is what it is. So I had a bit of that, and yours is more serious, so you had more of that. But so I think that's one of the first points that I could make about, um, and I could see this very clearly, and then I could see my practice, how I have organized that sixth pillar of adaptation, which I haven't really delivered much of, but I have it really organized on how we can use that to adapt. And so I'm learning from the challenge because I'm paying attention, applying my practice, learning more about how my practice applies, organizing things even better while my dog is shitting on the floor. Does that make sense? So that's one of the things that we can do when experiencing challenges, is using that voice of logic, coming back to the practice, and then we start to learn from the experience. And it's not the universe has a lesson for me, because that makes it sound like there's an entity that is testing us. It's like, you know what? Ernest hasn't had the dog shit on the floor in a little while. I think we're going to throw this test at him to see how it's just the wind. and I'm a kite, and there's going to be some things that I have to adapt to when that change is more rapid and tumultuous. I don't know if I ever have said that word correctly, but I like writing it. Does that make sense, Ida? That's kind of just a framework I could start with, and then I could actually explain the sixth pillar and kind of how that looks in practice. It will be in a book further down the road, and it's more a part of, no, it's not a part of hydrostasy. It's more of counterbalance and warrior training that leads up to hydrostasy. But does that make sense, Ida? Did that occur for you at all? Like that voice of logic where it's just like, this isn't gonna be beneficial. Should probably go back to.
And to the logic for me was to carry on. If he was safe in bed and I can't do anything more than what I've been doing comfort wise, I could carry on doing the things that I like to do to make my life better for me. Instead of in the past, I would have sat around and done all the worrying and all that. I have learned from experience and that voice of logic in my head that says that I'm going to feel better and I'm going to be able to function better if I do all the things that the self-care that I need for me. And that sounds so woke. I hate even talking like that. Self-care. but it's true, you know, to actually go out and talk to your friends and get into the sea and do the things that I do, even for small periods of a time throughout the day, is a safety valve that makes the rest of my existence smoother, I could say.
Sure. And is self-care considered a woke terminology? I didn't know that. That's weird.
I'm not really
Probably,
sure.
yeah.
I'm not really sure what woke means. Well, kind of over here would mean probably the extreme of self-care, you know, where people are so into themselves that they're, you know, we've talked about this before, they're all princesses, they're all warriors, you know, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's veering towards that, where they don't want anything uncomfortable in their life at all. There are no hard
Sure.
things to do. Any you know,
Yeah.
the safety aspect, the softness aspect has ramped up so high that everybody's wrapped in cotton wool and you can't say anything to them. I sort of think of that as woke, and the word self-care has that tinge to it, if you know what I mean. It has that.
Mm.
So I
Interesting.
know you work in the self-care industry, which is different.
Well,
That's
no, I
different.
think
I
I
think
work in
you're using
acupuncture.
that. Yeah, you're using that differently because you're in the profession of it. You're
Yeah.
probably using it properly, but it's a bit like the mindfulness thing. It's kind of diluted here and has turned it
That makes
into a
sense.
blanket thing, you know.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I think over in the States, woke is kind of used anything to go against the norm of what everybody else in society is doing.
Yeah,
Kind of how they use it here.
and it originally began as a term to say basically stay aware of your environment because there's potential danger. And typically it would be people of color and even indigenous people would use the phrase specifically when they were in white neighborhoods. They would say, stay woke. You need to keep your head on a swivel. Those are where those phrases originated from. So it goes pretty, I guess, pretty far back, not that far back, but to slavery.
Yeah, but not nowadays. It's not really. It's just
Nowadays it's used,
convoluted.
it's an
Very
undefined,
convoluted.
it's an
Yeah.
undefined term. You know, people talk about it, but then when you say what is it, they have no clear definition. So that's
Law of attraction, like anything,
like a lot of things. Yeah.
like anything. That's why
Yeah.
we can't declare war on the terminology, but I can see the reason why you stay away from some of it, because
Right.
if it's trending towards diluted, then
Mhm.
it just complicates trying to communicate.
Yeah. So here's another thing, and this one isn't going to feel as good to talk about, but I mean, it's going to most likely occur in your voice of logic anyway. But when we're in challenges, we also see our attachments. not necessarily to like our loved one in that case, but our other activities. I could also kind of feel that, so an attachment is just an attachment. It's not good, it's not bad. It's like most things, like habit. We're very likely going to be naturally creating some degree of attachment just by being around something a lot. I had that old phrase that I would call entanglement, or like an entanglement effect between two people, or between objects or ideas, or I mean, there's all kinds of things that we can entangle with or attach to. So we can gauge our attachment by the degree of suffering that we feel when the object of attachment is being threatened or removed. Does that make sense? I would say also that this, I guess it's not super important, but I've never heard this anywhere. This is something that I've put together. I've kind of organized it. So I say that for two reasons. One, you can take it for what it's worth, because it's not like scientific or anything, I guess. The mind will want to create predictability to safety, absolutely, because if it can predict the future, then it's going to feel far more safe. Yeah. So, but we can gauge our level of attachment, our degree of attachment, by how we feel when the object of attachment is threatened or removed. Does that make sense? And when we're in a challenge, you can almost always have an opportunity to feel something that you're attached to, and that's an opportunity to learn. Not at this point, surely it's not an opportunity to leak power or get down on yourself, which is, leaking power, getting down on yourself, self-pity, woe is me, or, no, why is this happening to me type of interaction. So, I mean, that's one side note that we could make, is that amidst these challenges, it is an opportunity for us to see what we're attached to. And that's not good, that's not bad, but it is an opportunity to learn more about ourselves. And we've talked about that, Marcus Aurelius' goal of know thyself. That's just another aspect of the totality, nothing, that we need to cling and attach to, but it's an opportunity to learn more about how we ourselves are operating, especially to challenges. That is a key indicator. Like Ida, you're talking about how people want to create environments where they're not challenged, where they're not uncomfortable. But what happens when they're in a situation and they're uncomfortable? They are not adaptable. So rather than woke or good or bad, or let's just look at, is this aiding my ability to adapt to situations, or is this taking away from it? Is this making it more difficult to adapt? Stronger attachments can make it more difficult to adapt, because our attention and our mind and our energy will keep wanting to go, we'll feel that pull at the very least, right? At the most, it'll take us out of our practice, and then we'll realize it, and we'll have to counterbalance.
Sure, and it will help us mitigate our degree of attachment. I think that's what's, I didn't hear Ida's whole story, but it seems that she accepts a level of attachment to her loved ones. There's a level of attachment there, and I accept that. I'm not changing it, or I'm not going to try to do anything to change it. But what I've learned from the practice is, when I'm practicing, which is a form of self-care, when I'm practicing and my practice leads me to choose things that help support my practice, like going in the sea, like whatever Ida would describe as self-care, or the way she chooses to navigate her life above the threshold of recognition. She can recognize her attachment that she's accepted, but she doesn't have to reaffirm it every second. Like, if I am not sacrificing every minute of the day, then it means I love my husband less. Sometimes when we have an attachment, we keep reaffirming that attachment, and it becomes, the momentum keeps continuing in that direction. So any blip in the screen, with whether her husband's in a good mood or a bad mood, or whether he liked the dinner she cooked or didn't, becomes a source of suffering, because we continue to emphasize and grow that attachment in ways that are extreme and not beneficial. So the practice lends us to see that how much attachment we have to something, not just that we are attached, but how, to what degree are we attached, and maybe we can mitigate that and move, navigate in a more, in a way that we prefer, that lends to more adaptation to our, efficiency and balance in our lives.
Mhm. Yeah, so one thing that I'll kind of present when we get into hunting power is that the hydrostasy effect is the feeling of balance. And we can feel when we're going in and out of that. And the more aware we are of ourselves in the moment, we can feel the imbalance of attachment. Our mind is now preferred because it's become more acclimated to balance. And so we actually, when you're seeing an attachment, awareness of it, attention of it is enough. It will change on its own. That's one of the things of non-interference, but that's a slightly different direction. Just it coincides with what Donna was saying though, but that could be a whole different conversation that leads into hunting power. But so one thing that I'll say though is that there's two kinds of ways that two approaches, or no, two ways it will look in Qigong when we're adapting to challenges. Typically, because in the beginning, we're not practicing before the challenge occurs. So, and this is typically in the beginning, remember, because we're forgetting and remembering our practice. And then some people will probably start to use the practice only when they need to counterbalance, when they're feeling suffering, when they're feeling that things aren't going their way, or they think they need to use it, and that's okay. I can't, it's fine, whatever. But the idea is that, what was the idea? Where was
That
I
you
going?
Talking
have
about
to- you have to
counterbalance.
practice. Sorry, you
No.
have your practice in place before.
Oh, that's the
challenge
difference. Right.
occurs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I need my notes so I can write that down. Keep it in order. But in the beginning of our practice, it is going to look like counterbalance because we have forgotten our practice and then the challenge occurs. However, that dynamic is different in hydrostasy. It just is, because in hydrostasy, one of the defining characteristics is that you are maintaining a point of attention at all times, at least one. At least one deliberate, specific, intentional, on your note card point of attention at all times. It doesn't have to be the same one. If it's on your note card, you didn't have to wake up this morning and say the color blue. It's on your note card. And you can pick different ones and alternate and yada yada, but you always have at least one, which means that you're practicing before the challenge occurs. And that will be a fundamentally different dynamic. Does that make sense? So that's one of the first things I would point out.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It's
And
like learning to ride a bike in the beginning.
Mhm.
It's more gross attunements that you make, just trying to stay on the bike without your feet touching the ground or
Yeah.
falling over. Once you're riding the bike, it's micro adjustments that you're making because you have several points of attention that are already engaged. So the adaptations are micro adjustments.
Sure. It could also be like if you're driving and you're not really paying attention, you're going to be less likely to adapt to an oncoming accident, right? Or the potential for an accident. However, if you're doing your Qigong practice, for example, you'll be hyper aware of the present moment, and you're going to be more likely to respond, react, and adapt quicker, faster, and with more efficiency than if you weren't paying attention. So when we're paying attention to the present moment, we have a better opportunity to adapt more elegantly because we were paying attention to the present moment. Pretty.
That's what I meant about attachment to degrees.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And then so we have the opportunity to see and feel the degree of attachment when the challenge occurs. And then so here's how I personally tied it together. And this is how I would start to address it when we get towards the end of the practice. So I talked about this triangle. This triangle is a part of my practice. This is something that I look at in my mind every single day. And on the base of it, and then the next, and then one of my favorites, and then the capstone. And that leads to this, I would have to say, effect that can be felt that would be classified as abstract to a certain extent. Abstract meaning that it is only perceivable by the perceiver. However, there are visible derivatives. You can see the shine in someone's, you know, eyes and in their face, and you can see their posture, and you know that when someone energetically or emotionally isn't well, you can see that in their body. That's a part of traditional Chinese medicine, and that's one of the ways that they will, you know, it's not diagnosis, but it's more how they ascertain how you're arriving that day, because traditional Chinese medicine treats the person that arrives that day. It's unique to you, and also unique to you and how you arrived in that moment. And I really like that. So that's one of the big things about traditional Chinese medicine I really enjoy. So if this effect is in place, very likely you wouldn't look at somebody and they're like, "Hey, Ernest, how you doing?" "Oh, you know, I'm feeling the vibrancy of my life experience and really connected to the moment." You see what I mean? That seems incongruent, doesn't it? So, to a certain extent, you can see this, but you would have to probably follow the person around for a little while. That's why I say that. I'd have to follow you around. I'd have to watch you drive without you knowing I'm there, or something like that. So my base is appreciation, and I do it via death as my advisor. This is something that I'll remind myself through mantras. I'll remind myself visually. I'll remind myself with points of logic, and I'll do it the second that I wake up. Does that make sense? So this is deliberate modulation, by the way. So first of all, if I'm talking about any of this, the very first technique, I really want to make this a point. This is a huge point in my practice, and I don't know where Qigong is ever going to go. I can't make any predictions, but it is absolutely important, is the technique of engaging the space that you've created. The first 3 layers of the practice helps to create that space. In hydrostasy, you can engage that space as a point of cognitive attention. That will open the door for everything else. Does that make sense? Deliberate modulation, sensing energy, the act of adaptation is almost, especially when you're really practicing, it's almost instantly felt the moment that you put your attention that direction. Does that make sense? I don't think this group would find that far-fetched. But it begins with the technique of engage the space, because the space is required for what are you going to do with that space, right? Does that make sense?
It makes sense, and it really is only something you can understand if you have some practice under your belt, because otherwise you don't know what the space feels like. The reason why you can engage the space is because once you recognize that you're not, or you're pulling away from it, or the balance is getting off, where you're starting to slip towards reactivity instead of, you know, whatever, you're in a battleground, whatever, the balance is off. Once you say the words or have the concept of where's my space, and let's engage that, a whole bunch of things fall into place. You just have to say or think of points of attention, or you have to think of the feeling of the space, and then it feels like it falls into place, but it's like the micro movements when you're riding a bicycle and you approach the sand, and you're riding across the sand differently than you ride across asphalt where your tires are gripping the wheel. You know, it's a subtle difference to somebody looking from far away, but there's actually a lot of micro adjustments happening. So to engage the space has a feeling, the space has a feeling associated with it. And so to navigate in that space is always something new, but you have had to know what the space feels like in order to do that. Otherwise, it will sound completely abstract.
Yeah, and that would tie back to the 3 parts of knowledge, that I can give you the information and I can share my experience, but without personal experience, there's no knowing, no true
Right,
knowledge.
which is why I misinterpreted it every time you said it up until
Mhm.
recently, because it didn't really have such a clear feeling to me to know the difference of being in it or not in it.
Yeah.
So I didn't even hear the words the way you intended, because I didn't have enough practice under my belt for me, for my person,
Mhm.
my experience.
True.
Would you say that the little spaces that you create by doing your practice, this is the way I'm feeling it, little spaces, little pockets of spaces in between everyday things, and then longer spaces, that all gains momentum the more you practice.
Absolutely,
So
and it becomes dream walking.
yeah, and the spaces
Right.
become longer and they become desired, really
Absolutely.
desired. Yeah.
Really desired.
So,
Yeah.
so that's okay. I'm doing it right then.
Yeah. And the thing is because I'm surprised we haven't used the word. I have a word for the space. It's called peace. And the mind is no longer at war or at odds with the present moment. And that's why when it has accumulated, it leads to that feeling of dream walking where you have no problem in the world. You're Andy Dufresne walking in the prison courtyard as if you were walking through a park.
It's funny, you said death is your advisor, and for me, 1440, which you told us about years ago,
Mhm.
that there were 1440 minutes in a day, and it's funny how everything applies, no matter what stage of the practice you're in, or whatever we're calling it. It's not a level, it's just a
Layers.
layer.
Mhm.
1440 is something to remember. Death as an advisor is something to
Right.
remember. But now, for me, I really think about death as an advisor in terms of when I say 1440 to myself, I have that many minutes in a day, and how do I want to spend this?
Exactly.
How do I want, this is my life. How do I want to spend this minute?
Yes.
Whether I'm cleaning up the dog poop on the rug, then how, or I'm sitting in the emergency room, like, this is my minute. How do I want to spend that?
Exactly. Yep. And then what usually comes up without, and this is a way to do it in the beginning, is that you look at something that you have in your life and you say, I appreciate that. That's okay. I'm not declaring war on that. This is a little bit different because you're looking at your opportunity to exist, that you are alive as a very base of, gosh, I can be kind of happy about that, right? Because what's the alternative? I don't know. Um, on one end, it could be just complete oblivion. On another end, it could be I'm running through fields of white with yada yada, whatever. But
I have found that embracing the minute and with death as an advisor has made me far less, I have no fear of death, really. Maybe when I'm facing it, I will, but I don't know. I don't know. I don't fear it. It doesn't become something I'm trying to avoid. Nothing becomes something I'm trying to avoid. I'm just trying to have more peace. Peace is the most important thing to me. So let me use whatever's in my toolbox and whatever I have in my capability, in my bag of tricks. I like to refer to it as a bag of tricks because it's funner that way. Um, but let me utilize my techniques to enhance my peace, because that's really all that matters. And I'm the most functional, even with the people that I love or cleaning up dog shit. When I'm doing that, my life is better when I do that, and it's preferred and it's desired. And like Ida said, those gaps, I want to extend them, elongate them, and remember them, because it's my priority, because it's what I want. And it's not a selfish, it's not like the same explanation that Ida gave for the woke people. I just want to have warm, fuzzy feelings all the time. It's not warm,
no,
fuzzy all the
not that.
time.
No, it's not that at all.
No.
No, I get it. Did you have a comment, Mike?
Yeah, just um Donna mentioned one thing there that I was gonna ask into what you were saying, just to like check in on 1440. Can you
Oh, there are 1,440 minutes in a day.
Yeah,
I think of, that's like, it's how I label, it would be how I write it on my note card or how I say it in my head. It represents a concept to me
It's a point
as
of logic.
death as an advisor.
Yeah.
yeah,
That
I get
have-
that. I'm sorry.
What were you gonna say, Mike? What's the question?
Yeah. So I get the 1440 is how many minutes in the day death is an advisor. I know the movie, the play Rent, right? And they, how many, it's like
I've never seen it.
500,000 something minutes in a year.
Sure.
Yep, the
Yeah.
song.
And yeah. So I get that. And then you said something that you said that's all that matters. And that goes into my question.
Because death as your advisor inspires you to live. And that's what Donna is pointing out, is that
Yeah.
creates a feeling of, how do I want to spend this moment?
Mhm.
Let's say that space junk fell from the sky and landed on my head in this very moment. The dog may be shitting on the floor. That's a challenge that I have to adapt to. But do I want to experience that moment in psychological turmoil, thinking about dumb shit, focusing on myself, wondering what the other person is thinking, trying to control future situations so that I can ensure that my desires are yada, yada, yada? Or do I want to be at peace? So that's kind of what it comes down to, is like, what do I want from this? Really is the warrior's mentality as well, is what do I want from this moment? Because I have this one life to live and I'm going to make absolutely every act count. That doesn't mean that I'm going to jump out of airplanes and try to do stupid shit all the time because YOLO. It just means, what is the quality of this moment? Am I squeezing everything that I have available to me? Everything, I put that in air quotes. Am I squeezing what is available to me, from the moment to get as much from it as I can? Because this shit, at least is in the way that it is currently, is temporary.
Okay, so just let me set this up. I understand that I do have that feeling sometimes, and I've had that feeling. I can go back to it where I feel that way.
Yes.
And then there are other times when I don't, and other shit matters. My attention of thinking is on whatever it might be. I'll go back to the time when I used to be in the city, working that management job, and I would be out in the Union Square, walking the park, walking the market, and like just everything come around, and I feel like good in the sun, and just like feel great. And then the next day or later, or at some point, there'll be someone on me and getting into a whole situation that I label as incorrect, and I'm swimming in the thinking of it. So at that point, then I'm not in the mindset of nothing matters, or all that matters is what
Yeah,
the
so
present moment.
I
So
can
is it
answer this
just
for you.
balance from there, and
Mhm.
just redirect, notice you're out of it? Where was your attention when you got into that thinking? Notice there wasn't a good point of attention, and coming back to it. Is that really the technique there?
Well, no, the technique would be to wake up in the morning and begin your practice. And then, if you were doing Qigong begins the second you wake up, because it's an embodiment practice. It's not a half-ass it and hope that things come together somehow in the end, maybe kind of practice. It's, I'm going to do this to the best of my ability as often as I can remember all throughout the day. And then that's going to help me prepare for these situations, like I said, rather than counterbalancing. What you were giving the example of is literally leaf at the mercy of the wind. The wind is the situation that led to the feeling of, this is this moment and I have it. But now in this other moment, the wind has changed, and it's, maybe the boss is getting at your shit, or somebody's not pulling their weight, or things just aren't working out, but you think that they should, and you don't understand what's going on. In both of those examples, you're just responding to the environment, right? And that's okay. I'm not, for me, that's not okay at all.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
went back. I'll just be clear, and this is my own measurement, but I just want to state it there. I did go back a few years, maybe 3, 4, 5 years back into Union Square, my situation.
Mhm.
Now I have other things that I would notice that I label, like if I get anxious or I get excited about something, it still is that, but I think it's not as much a percentage of time spent there. I think more time is spent rooted and grounding, and not like running off into the whatever's going on in the moment. So still a leaf, but a little bit more with a tether now. I think I'm a little bit more attached to the root of the tree, and maybe
Well,
not just that, just giving myself a little credit.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah,
not at the mercy of it, but there is the time when, oh, my ex is doing, and the emails go, and whatever, and this isn't going to work out. Or I get into that kind of negative spin thinking, and then sort of catch myself. When I catch myself, I know that I was not so rooted at the time when I left Earth, if you will. So
Yeah, and if I'm going to put this in the perspective of Qigong, which is all I could do right now, is that when you realize it, the Qigong practice would incorporate the rule of three, redirection using 3 points of attention, including the voice of power, back to the present moment to reestablish your practice and your points of attention. So realizing it, and then just, I'm not rooted, because what was keeping you rooted? How, or did you just, are we just expecting some kind of residual root? And then, when shit pops up, we're just going to expect that residual root to help us. So let me explain what I do. So, and then maybe that can help clarify what the practice looks like, because that's the only way I can answer the questions is, well, here's the practice. This is how the practice would answer your question, or address what you're talking about. So first of all, I am talking about hydrostasy. So that means two things. One, I am engaging a point of attention at all times. Actually, you know what? I'll list these out so that you can see this on the whiteboard. One, these are the characteristics of hydrostasy. So that one point of attention at all times would lead to the axis of hydrostasy, which I haven't talked a lot about, but it is coming up in one of those discussions on Tuesday. That is my practice. That axis, if you say Ernest, if you drop out of the sky and you say Ernest, that axis is where my mind is. So I'm just going to spell it out for everyone in the practice in hydrostasy. Where exactly are these points of attention that leads to this capstone? And the capstone I've talked a little bit about, but so Mike, when you're talking about all of these situations that you're talking about, how much is ordinary cognition and how much are you actually aware in the moment in an active way of your complete oneness to the entire universe? That's the difference between ordinary and non-ordinary cognition. And in hydrostasy, you would still feel that oneness while the dog is shitting on the floor. That's my point. So I'm still able to maximize and find the quality. And I'm like, this is the human experience. I have a dog, sometimes they shat on the floor. It is what it is, right? Just keep on moving, keep doing your thing. It's not his fault. Don't get mad. And this is all a part of my practice. That's the rule of three. That's redirection. That's counterbalance. So I'm giving you an example of the practice occurring. Complaint thoughts, Shayna's gone. Well, why did this? I'm trying to figure it out. Why did this happen? No. None of that is going to help me maintain the quality of the moment and universal oneness. So let me go back to my axis of hydrostasy. The axis is just my practice, which creates this triangle. Does that make sense? I also,
Yes.
if we're in the layer of hydrostasy, there is space. All you have to do is engage it. Because if you're doing this practice and you have 4 points of attention active, there's space. I promise you. It's the mindfulness slider. That's a principle. The more you're engaging the present moment deliberately, intentionally, and willfully, the more you're accumulating the flow of personal power. And then you're also there for all of the adaptation opportunities as they occur. And you can feel that space. And that's where everything begins. So the space leads to this triangle. That space has to be there first before I deliberately modulate or sense energy or go into the active adaptation. Does that make sense? Without that space, we need to go back to a different layer. Counterbalance, for example. We're in the ER, very likely, it's a counterbalance opportunity. we're not necessarily in that space. But like Donna said, the more that we practice, the more that we can find it quicker. And it's like, oh, right back at it. There it is. And then before you know it, it's almost hard to leave it. It's like you get so comfortable in the space of peace that you know, that's actually how behavioral change starts to occur, because you feel the imbalance. You know, I started to feel the imbalance of coffee. Now I just don't want as much because I don't want to go out of balance. So my behavior modulates automatically to make sure that I'm sustaining the peace and the solidity and the power of being balanced. So it feels good. It feels,
I was able to find peace in the ER,
yes,
even in
of course.
extreme pain. I really was. I wasn't necessarily, the pain distracted me from the quality and the continuity of the peace, but it was always near. It
Sure.
was always nearby, and I could feel myself, my thought streams about things were talking me away from the practice. They were the
Yes.
fear thoughts. They were the poor me thoughts. They were the why aren't they moving faster thoughts. This is the well, I was the here before that person thoughts. And as soon as they came up, they felt so horrible. It really added to the pain. Even the pain was worse when I was doing that. My body tensed up, which made everything worse. And I was like, well, where is the peace? Like, and then I had the conversation with myself. I was having the conversation, then I could find it and sustain it for a period of time. And I found that to be remarkable. And I didn't sensationalize it, but I noticed that it was a product of practicing that I did that morning when I opened my eyes, start my practice. And that was what a momentum I had going before I had to go to the ER. So
Mhm.
all my decisions were different because of it.
Yep. And so decisions being different is the behavioral change. So that'll kind of warm us up when we get into the topics of hunting power, which is the behavioral change aspect of hydrostasy or the Qigong system. So I need to put a slash here because it doesn't have to be the axis. It could also just be the four directions. In theory, a person could have their own four directions. I don't know if their own four directions will still point towards this triangle and that connection, but I don't know. So in theory, it could. So these are the prerequisites for this triangle. And then I'll show you how this triangle helps me adapt. It helps me learn. It helps me grow. It takes me out of this dynamic of getting there, of trying to control, of always thinking about myself and yada, yada. That can't exist because in order to do any of this, I first have to have space. Space in what? Streams of thought that either exists or it doesn't. You can watch your experience throughout the day and see how much are you actually thinking. This should be very apparent by now in the practice. How much are we actually thinking throughout the day? That is
Even
a
when
big
you're
indication.
walking through the park and you're enjoying the sun
Absolutely.
and you're observing, like you can be thinking about and labeling how wonderful everything is, and you don't even notice that you're doing it because it's a positive thing or it's a pleasurable thing. But it is still a lot of thought streams going on there, or there can be. And yeah, so if something occurs and you are completely thrown out of that space, it means you were probably doing a lot of thinking and not a lot of practicing. You might feel really good. You might have a higher degree of appreciation for people and things in your life, and you're not thinking about negative thoughts, but it doesn't mean you
Dumb
start.
shit.
Dumb
Yeah.
shit. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can just summarize.
So yeah, it all comes back to where's the practice? Where was it?
Okay.
It took me a long time to start as soon as I opened my eyes. It took me a long time,
Really?
like really long time.
That's an interesting thing to note. So, okay, now we can talk about the triangle because we know that in order to access this triangle, we first have to have at least one point of attention that leads to the all four directions are active simultaneously, and then there's space to engage. If we're engaging the space, I am able to instantly deliberately modulate to the emotional memory of appreciation for the opportunity to exist. So I am walking through my entire day feeling appreciation. And it's not appreciation because I got this thing in my life, yada, yada, and that's okay if somebody's doing that, whatever. It's appreciation for the opportunity to exist. It's the base of appreciation, and that's why it's on the bottom. That, if I can sustain it, leads to contentment. Mike, in a lot of the situations that you're noticing that you're mentioning, you're giving yourself credit for the practice and you're noticing more about yourself and that know thyself. Notice how much we're either bored or otherwise at odds with the present moment. We're not content. Now, we can still be creating, we can still be inventing, we can still be revolutionizing something with just new energy and be perfectly content. When we're not content, very likely we're going to go back towards our cell phones. We're going to go back towards our mindless conversations with other people and with ourselves. And then we'll seek entertainment, and then we'll seek our biology satisfaction. And then before you know it, we're basically operating like basic primates. Does that make sense? Should I start over? That doesn't make sense. Where was I?
No, that makes sense.
But Ernest, can I ask you a question? When you're in a degree of appreciation of everything and contentment, that appreciation isn't, that appreciation is not in your thoughts. I
It's not.
appreciate
It's a feeling.
this. I appreciate that.
It can't be, Donna, because I'm engaging the space. That's a prerequisite.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
So your
yes.
senses,
It's
you
I feel it.
have a lot of sensory attention active.
Of course, I have at least 4 directions of attention.
Temperature and weight distribution and connection and if your eyes were closed, you could still have it.
Absolutely.
And so and I mean that can be misinterpreted. I know you're talking to people who are practicing, so you're explaining this to people who are practicing, but it can easily be misinterpreted. I have an appreciation. Oh, I'm so glad that this, it's not about your evaluation of it. It's
There's no
about
evaluation.
you experiencing the moments with multiple points of attention, sensory and behavior and cognition, if there is any cognition.
Well, there's a lot of cognition. There's always cognition. Perception itself is an aspect of cognition. So always cognition, but
right.
Yeah, no. So first of all, nothing I'm saying involves thought in this triangle because I'm engaging the space where there is no thought, which is where the appreciation comes. And that's deliberate modulation. I remember how that feels like, so I can just immediately remember what it feels like to, appreciate the opportunity to exist, to answer your question, Donna. So yes, it is, my attention just goes on that feeling.
So when I wake up first thing and I'm in my bed and I'm just wake up and I say, here I am in this bed, I can feel the bed, I'm looking at the ceiling, I'm so appreciate that I've got a roof over my head and that I'm safe from the weather, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
No, not that. I think that's
No,
good.
but feeling that.
Feeling that, yeah.
The more you do that, where every morning I wake up,
Bingo,
instead of
yes,
then I'm getting the feeling of the appreciation feeling
exactly.
before I even put my foot on the ground.
Absolutely, Ida. All of these things in this triangle we have been prepping for. That's why I've included them in the triangle. I have other things that I personally deliberately modulate to. I don't list them as a part of the practice because I don't know, that might just be an Ernest thing. The appreciation will be automatic because we've been doing the first 3 layers of the practice, like you said. Does that make sense? And we'll get tastes of it and we'll get warmed up to it. And like you said, when you wake up every morning and you kind of start to feel it, eventually that's a memory that you have stored and you can just recall that memory from that space has to exist. Otherwise, you can't recall that memory because you're too busy thinking dumb shit, right?
Yes, but then that becomes a feeling in your body with all aspects of the
With all
practice.
aspects of the
So
practice.
you,
Yep.
you become this person who has got this underlying sort of, it feels almost like a second person inside you, like a drive is maybe too strong a word, but it's not really. But there is like a, when the negativity, when the things that you don't desire are happening, you've still got the inside person, the
Mhm.
person that you've trained yourself to be, in there, who's rebelling against the other person who's trying to take over.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I'm talking like there's three people here, but really and truly, yeah, I feel that
Mhm.
that the minute that outside circumstances and that resistance against what's happening now is happening, then that person inside me comes alive and says, no, you're not going there. You're
Right.
not going down that road. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So to summarize, this is the active adaptation that we're leading up to, which is the final pillar of the practice, something we haven't talked a whole lot of. This is the technique. This is actually technique in hydrostasy because we're engaging the space and we can recall emotional memory and we can open ourselves up to sensing energy, which is the fourth and fifth pillar of the practice. They always have been deliberate modulation and sensing energy. So that becomes accessible and even more accessible, especially a way to embody it, because we're maintaining multiple points of attention all throughout the day, at least one. And then because we're creating space in the overall volume of thought that we can actually start to engage that as a technique. Okay, I want to make sure that's 100% clear. Did you get that, Mike? Does that make sense? The gaps in your thought can be perceived. The longer the gap, the more the momentum of the gap, the more it feels like peace, inner peace. Your mind is no longer at war with itself, and eventually it won't be at war with the present moment.
And
Does that
those gaps are the space to which you refer when
exactly?
you
That
say.
is, and it's a feeling. You feel it, and you can even sense into your own forehead. Like you can feel it over here. Like if you're all, oh, that's the opposite of what I'm talking about. Sensing energy is no. Sensing energy is a form of, I would say it's another way of deliberate modulation. Deliberate modulation and sensing energy are something that we do when the mind is clear. We can really engage. It's like how a native would look at a mountain and start to create characteristics of that mountain because that connection is more visceral because there's no interference. And so we can sense into the present moment. I would love to use the word spirit. Sure. I don't always use that word because of the way that people use it. I would use the unseen aspect of the human being is perceiving the unseen aspect of the world around us and inside of us. How is that happening? I have no fucking idea. I have some hypothesis, but nothing to share. But yeah, absolutely. You're more sensing spirit, and that can become a point of attention. Look at a person's average day. How much in their attention in the moment is spirit? Or are we just talking about it? Are we just putting memes about it? Are we just writing about it? Just telling people what it is and what it shouldn't be and yada, yada, yada. Or as Michael kind of gave the example of earlier, we're kind of just playing a crapshoot and then some moments, introduce spirit, or it doesn't introduce it. It creates the space necessary for you to perceive it and put your attention on it. But then there's other situations, which is the majority of people's days, where they're so engrossed in ordinary cognition that they're missing spirit. Oh, they're not really feeling, but it's still a part of their experience. And that's the thing, is that they're not feeling that that if the spirit's unwell, it's like an underlining mood of unwell. And it can be very difficult to perceive. And so like when someone's like, this is always happening to me and like shit's up, that's very likely because that spirit is very ill, for the lack of a better word. I'll have a better word come to me later, but the spirit is injured in a manner of speaking. Okay, So we're assuming that we're in our hydrostasy practice, and the act of adaptation it begins before hydrostasy because it begins in counterbalance. That's what counterbalance and warrior training is. We're beginning, just like Ida said, we start to taste it. We start to, feel it a little bit, experience it a little bit, and then it becomes easier to experience and recall because basically it's just remembering. We just need to, doesn't this sound familiar? This is the same shit I was saying in 2018. We're just remembering. That's all it is. We're remembering our techniques. We're remembering that we are the entire universe experiencing itself as a human, and we're going to hold on to what that feels like as a point of attention. That's the capstone.
And we can
That's what it
feel when we fall below the threshold of recognition, how we come away from that feeling. And
Yes.
that's why we go towards it, because it's desired.
And that becomes what we call the hydrostasy effect. It's the effect of you can feel what balance feels like. You've gotten very familiar with it, and things that are taking you out of balance won't feel as good, and your behavior will start to naturally change on its own, not according to what some other person said that you should do, or how you should eat, or how you should live, or how you should love, or yada yada yada. You are going according to your balance based on the feeling, because you're not engaging the thought streams and you're practicing this practice.
It's also a recognition for me. It was a recognition that we said this in the beginning, and logically it resonated, emotionally it resonated, but experientially it resonates now, which is I am 100% responsible for that, and I'm 100% capable of that. And so if I'm not doing it, then I'm just not doing it. That's all it has to be. And remembering means I'm doing it again, and that's all it has to be. And
That is all it
it's
is.
as simple as that. And it's as powerful. It's really powerful, but it's very simple. It may not be easy in the beginning, but once I made that recognition from a feeling perspective, it was very empowering.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. So we have space because we've been practicing the first 3 layers of this practice for years. Who knows? Maybe someone's been practicing for decades. And so it's the space is becoming preferred. The feeling of connection to the moment is becoming preferred. We could feel when we're going away from it because we're using the basic dynamic of the mind. It is now desiring peace, and peace becomes that unbending desire that we have in us. And now we're really ready for hydrostasy. We'll want it. We'll crave more of that space, and we'll still be balanced. Okay, so we have the space. We're engaging it as a point of attention. That is my number one technique. The biggest technique, the best technique, the number one technique to rule all techniques is to engage the overall space in thought that you have created. That's why we've been doing this whole damn practice in the first place, was to create that space. Now, when you create it, engage it and watch it grow. Watch the peace grow. And now you have the opportunity, because you're not interfering in those moments. You're not thinking, you're not reacting and responding to things in habitual ways with your practice in that moment. And in that moment, there is non-interference. Well, what are we going to do with that non-interference? You can make another triangle for yourself and make your own deliberate modulation. That's all good. I've created this one because the first 3 layers lend to it. It should be very easy. By this point, we should know what appreciation for death as our advisor feels like, because that's going to be a part of the Qigong practice from the very beginning. Pretty sure I mentioned that in the first layer. So the first feeling that I always deliberately modulate to, that I think will be accessible to every single person who practices Qigong, will be appreciation for the present moment as a feeling. Again, as Donna pointed out, there is no thought involved at this point. Does that make sense? Because I'm engaging the space. What space? The space in the thought. So no thought is involved in this dynamic.
It's allowing it also. To me, the piece is there.
Oh, yeah.
I just created it. I didn't create it. I add to it, but
Yeah.
it already exists, and I'm creating it in me. But
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm allowing the piece and the connection that exists in my absence of recognition on it.
Sure.
I have an
Yeah.
example there. Been going out to my studio, and in the past, I can't help but notice something changing there. That I would have had to, not had to, but preferred to have had substitute dialogue by some kind of podcast or whatever in the background while I worked. Where now I just want the quiet, and this is unusual for me. I mean, I would have done that in the past sometimes, but I would have had the habit of putting on something in the background. Where now I can just sit in silence, and it's the most, it's lovely. It's just so lovely.
Because
Yeah.
you're listening to the brush in the water, you're listening to the sounds behind you, you're aware of the changing light outside the window, and the substitute dialogue now is getting in the way. And in the past, or maybe even now at times, the substitute dialogue is to help you point back to that direction, because it was interfering with your own thought streams. It was substituting for your thought streams. But now that you are in a space where there are less thought streams, you can access your points of attention. It's actually interference for some of your points of attention.
Big
Us.
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
and I'm finding that I can just sit and look at the piece that I'm working on, kind of with defocused vision. If I have no direction to go in, I can just sit there and look at it and listen around me. And then some tiny little curiosity impulse comes along that says, do this. And when I do that, magic things kind of happen. You know what I mean?
I
With,
do. I know
like,
exactly what you mean.
like
Yep.
you put if you're a writer, you may get a word or a
Sure.
sentence come into form, but where I would get it, it would be like if I just brighten that up a bit, just that wee bit on the painting,
Yeah.
and then things flow from there.
Yeah, I'll typically be in that space and some sort of organization for the human experience will come to my mind. I'll be like, oh, wow, yeah, like that really is really clear. Clarity comes to me a lot in those moments, not always as thoughts, as just other forms of perception and cognition as well. Ida, I could talk about that for a very long time because I can actually remember the moment where substitute dialogue became not as preferred. The only thing I would say is that that is a tool that you just don't have as much use for right now, but just file that away. Just put that in the toolbox, and maybe substitute dialogue will be something that, because of the need to adapt, could be useful. But it's one of those things that in the beginning, what I would say is kind of one of those relative techniques, one of those things that we can use until we just don't really, because how much do you think I use substitute dialogue? Like, how much do you think I need to listen to somebody else talk? You know, because that's better than thinking my own dumb shit. I'm not
Not
trying
at
to,
all. I would
yeah,
say
I'm not,
not at all, and it just becomes noise. Then
it does. And then it's
it's
like,
all
well,
just noise.
I can't, it's taking, it is exactly what Donna said. It is interference to my connection to the present moment and the flow between that connection, which is where that circle at the top of that capstone comes from. It is the nature of unobstructed, non-interfered connection to the world around us. And that feeling of oneness comes in, and that can become a new, sustained, and held point of attention, rather than just that meme that we put up on the internet that sounds good, or the pretentious thing that we say to somebody because we're trying to sleep with them or impress them or whatever. It becomes something that you are experiencing in the present moment as a part of the present moment that you feel without thought, is that connection and oneness to everything. And that's why every culture separated by space and time, they have had individuals within their culture who have created that. Like Donna said, you don't create it, but we're allowing it because we're not interfering with the present moment, implying that we should always be able to feel that connection to everything else while doing our daily affairs, which is where that balance comes in. We're not just zenned out on a rock all day, not doing shit because we're so one, man. No, we have a lot of just new energy. We have a lot of fun. We have a lot of enjoyment. We have a lot of creativity. We have a lot of connection, and we can have a lot of silence. We don't necessarily have to break every moment of silence with mundane speech because we can't feel relaxed in that type of moment.
However, Ida didn't try to get rid of substitute dialogue because she was trying to achieve some
Good
level, up level herself. She just found that the practice of using substitute dialogue, which was valuable to her at one time and helpful in pointing her in that direction, became interference because her practice had gained momentum.
Yep. Absolutely.
And also the using a power object, having your object of power with you. Now I'm finding, because it's not mostly because it does happen in other places, but because my studio is the place where I can modulate to this feeling easily, the feeling is in the minute I open the door and go
Your
in
place
and
of
sit
power.
down.
Yep.
Yes, it has become my place of power.
And that's good. Embrace it. We can all, because we're doing our practice, we'll be able to observe if we start to kind of develop an attachment to that type of thing, a clinging to
I
where
knew
now
you were going to say that, but
yeah,
I mean,
but
I
you'll
could
be
make
aware of
that.
that. No,
I could make that place of power anywhere where I have a chair in the day.
anywhere you want, but
Yeah.
no, I trust that
Not
you're
yeah,
doing your
I know.
practice, so that's not going to become a stumbling block for you.
Or the walk from the house to the studio,
Yeah.
how the earth feels under your feet as the seasons change. The crunch under your feet will become softer or harder depending on the temperature and
Yeah.
how the grass has grown, and all of that.
And something that the mind and the world embraces is attaching to extremes. So on one extreme, we have something that is completely conditional. And then we have something that's unconditional. And the world looks at and they're like, oh, unconditional, yada, yada. Let's just cling to that. You can have both. You can feel the feeling of oneness and connection while you walk to the car, but there also may be a very specific feeling that can only be felt, that will only ever be felt in that space. And that's all the more reason to embrace it. So we can embrace situational. Winning the Super Bowl feels like winning a Super Bowl. If you win a chess tournament, that's probably going to feel different. Still feel good, still feel oneness, still feel great, different. We can embrace different and the similarity between what oneness feels like, because it's non-differentiated. Does that make sense, Ida? So that's great. No, you're really encouraging me today, because the way that you're describing your practice, you're describing it to me without me telling you how it should look. And that means that Qigong it's doing its thing, or you're doing its thing. Okay, I want to finish this real quick just so I can say that I have finished it. So engaging the space, that's a prerequisite. Deliberately modulating to appreciation, which leads to the deliberate modulation of contentment. Contentment is not being bored or otherwise at odds with the present moment, aka happy, according to Thich Nhat Hanh. I'm going to use his definition of happiness. Everybody can go look that up. So contentment is the second portion of my base. That leads to one of my favorite deliberate modulation, because it's both deliberate modulation and sensing energy. And I'll show how to do this in the Qigong book, because like Ida's pointed out, there's introductory techniques that introduce us to the feeling, and then we play with it a little bit, we get more familiar with it, and now we can find it faster and faster, and then before you know it, you're embodying it. And that's the key. That's the momentum, the accumulative effect. That's a principle of this practice. And Ida and others, and Donna, you guys are pointing it out without me saying it. You're seeing it happen within the practice also, which is really nice. And this is kind of what it's all about, folks, but the feeling of freedom, because your mind is no longer being held down by its own thoughts, by its own encumbrance. Freedom equal dream walking. Dream walking equal freedom. You're walking through your present moment engaged, feeling contentment. You can still be doing so. Contentment doesn't mean that you don't do shit. It doesn't mean that you're not ambitious. It just means that you're not thinking about your ambition. You're not just thinking about shit all the time. You can be doing everything that you need to do. Your hands could be in the dirt in the garden while you're creating your garden, but yet you can be perfectly content. That also means that you can be waiting for somebody at the airport for an extra hour and 15 minutes and still just be perfectly content. That example was wildly specific, wasn't it? Okay. Any questions about these first three? This is deliberate modulation, and I love the last one of freedom, and the other ones kind of can be too, but this is deliberate modulation and sensing energy, because I've created so much space that now I can sense into the moment, and I can sense the uniqueness, which we could say is conditional, and the thing that just seems to resonate in underlying all experience, that oneness and the freedom that is in a mind that isn't in that dynamic of continuous, repetitive, habitual, nonstop streams of thought about yada yada, usually about yourself.
In the vein of accumulation
Yes.
and trajectory, I can see that freedom is the trajectory from where it was relief in the beginning of the practice. As the overall volume of thought started to decrease in increments, as my practice increased in increments, as my remembering became more frequent, there was a proportionate amount of relief that was felt. And then I started practicing for the sake of practicing, not just to relieve myself from anxiety or fear or attachment or whatever I was trying to relieve myself from. Thought streams, self-created interference. And the trajectory of that is the freedom you just described. It felt like relief in the beginning, and it grew to that feeling of freedom.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And then all of this from the very beginning will be lending to the feeling of the capstone that I described earlier, which is the feeling of universal oneness, not the abstract conceptual idea of it. You probably learned that shit a long time ago, the concept of it, the information. But it's the feeling of oneness. And in one way or another, the abstract quality of the moment. So the moment itself has quality. Life experience is underlined at this point, embodied with quality and oneness. That's my practice. So I wake up in the morning, I do my longest reach, highest vision, deepest love, and then I immediately go into my axis of hydrostasy. So I have my 4 points of attention that I'm maintaining, the convergence of breath, proprioception, my whole body in space and time, usually some defocused vision. I still like to play with shadows and stuff like that while I'm walking and doing that kind of thing. So I'm doing my practice, engaging the space that creates, and then I feel appreciation. I just immediately modulate my attention to appreciation. I remember it. I remember appreciation and I'm good. And then that leads to contentment. And now I'm not bored. I'm not at odds. I'm alive. I'm okay. I got to walk to work. My feet hurt. Fuck it. That's fine. It's a challenge. I'll be alive. I'll be okay. At least I'm here, right? I get to feel foot pain. I get to learn to buy better shoes or whatever, whatever. It's fine. And
Can
then
I ask
yes.
you, Ernest, you said you do your longest reach, the things that you listed there in the morning. How do you stop that from becoming habitual? Is it by changing the narrative, the story about your longest reach, or using your imagination to imagine different
I
things?
use my imagination, and I don't necessarily imagine different things. The act never feels habitual. It never feels automatic. It always feels like I could skip it if I wanted to, almost like flossing. You know what I mean? I still don't feel like flossing has become a habit for me. It's like I could still 100% just not do this because I don't really want to, right? That's not quite the same with the highest reach, longest vision. But it still feels like an act of volition and will. So it would come down to feeling. That still just doesn't feel like that rubber band, like I'm snapping myself. I would pay attention to the balance of it. And I guess if it did start to feel habitual, maybe I could change up the vision. Remember, some aspects of them are changing all the time. Well, not all the time, but you know, the longest reach, highest vision, longest reach will just always be outside of my reach. But you know, that highest vision, that's something that can keep changing. Or is it the other way around?
No, I just meant that the story of those things, you know, sometimes I'd wake up in the morning and I'm thinking, right, here I am in the bed. I can narrate that all and not feel it, or I can
Oh,
feel it and not narrate it.
I think that
Do
would
you
be
know
like,
what I mean?
I know what you mean. That would be like the progression of this practice, like everything
Yeah.
else. You start it and you know, maybe it feels a little bit like not forced, 'cause
Contrived,
it feels a
contrived,
little bit
yeah.
like you know, a technique. You know, it's on your note card. You need to remind yourself. You put sticky notes to do your highest vision, and then over time you start to remember a little bit more, and then over time you start to remember a little bit
Yes.
more. But then over time you can use your imagination to just you know, the image of it helps lead to the feeling of it. That remember that's a key
Yeah.
to the feeling, is the image of it, imagining, superimposing. That's consistent with cultures separated by space and time, very consistent in Tai Chi and traditional Chinese medicine and meditation,
Yes.
that you imagine, and what you imagine eventually you start to feel.
To feel, and then
Yeah.
you're putting quality, remembering to put the quality
There
into
you go.
those moments
Yep.
of imagining and feeling, not just as a process to get somewhere, but to actually
Right.
feel the moments that you're
Absolutely.
doing it. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That's
There
it.
you go. Yep. And then so my practice begins the second time. Actually, it begins in the dream state, and then it begins, you know, officially when I wake up. Abstract means that maybe Ida doesn't know exactly what I'm doing, you know, but she'll probably be able to tell by the indications of those four things with Igong: calm attitude, peaceful mind, impeccable self-awareness, and a calm attitude. She'll be able to observe those in my state of being. And she might even be able to observe when it's starting to go away a little bit, or back and forth, or whatever. That's the modulation or the micro adjustments that Donna was talking about. But that is my practice that leads to this feeling, and that is my primary point of attention, is the feeling of connection to the moment. That feeling of the oneness and the connection and the quality. It's all a soup now, but it's that shine. It's in Igong, or in traditional Chinese medicine, we could maybe call it Shen rising, in spirit rising. Maybe it's the reason that they show pictures of people with the halo behind them. I don't know. But it is that feeling of the cells of your being are connected to everything else. And it is oneness. And now you can see a more total version of yourself. Which includes the moment happening now. That's my practice. Any questions? And then I stop. That's the end of Igong too, by the way.
So seeing yourself as a separate person is a good thing, you know.
Seeing myself as a separate person.
No, you know, like you said a few weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, about Gene taking the photograph of himself
Yeah.
so that he could visualize himself as that person.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what you said there was I can't remember now what you said.
Well,
Something
so
like
hold
that.
on.
Yeah.
I'll just say that what Gene was doing is what we just talked about just a second ago, is that by doing that visualization, it leads to a feeling.
Yes, and I do feel quite a lot that I'm seeing myself not in an egotistical way, but I can actually see myself in real time
That's a
doing
good
the
technique.
things that yes,
Yeah, I like
that's
that
how I
technique.
become. Okay.
I love that technique, and I think that's a great warm up that will help create this or not create, but like Donna said, access perhaps but it will help us realize in the moment that feeling of that connection. So everything in that triangle, everything that I'm talking about now is just feeling. I'm not imagining it. It is that still abstract because Ida doesn't know what I'm feeling, right? Because it's my experience. It's unique to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, everyone's
Not
got
a,
their private place inside their head that nobody
yeah,
else can access.
yeah. No,
But you
well, I
might
mean,
be getting similar feelings, but you'll never know.
we'll never know for sure, but I bet a lot of them are similar. And I would say it's not detached, it's infinitely connected. But you see the totality, you see the individual aspects of the human experience. You see the likes, the dislikes, the pluses, the minuses, but you also see the body, the mind, the spirit, the moment, the totality, the planet, the solar I mean, you're feeling, and this is a feeling, not an image in your mind necessarily. The image in your mind is whatever you're doing. Maybe you're cutting a piece of chicken or something, so you're looking at the chicken, you're not visualizing something else, so but you're still feeling. So everything that I'm talking about now is a feeling. Visualization could be an awesome technique on your note card, and I'll include these types of techniques in the Qigong practice. But 100%, Ida, when you're imagining yourself from that view, when you're kind of detaching it's not detaching, it's you're adjusting the aperture of your focus. Before, maybe our focus was on this one little fucking tiny aspect of ourselves called what we want, our desire. That's the one thing that we're just fucking focusing on like a bomb. Like we just can't take our eyes. But instead, we're going to open the aperture. We're not going to disclude that, which is kind of what I feel like the word detachment might kind of, I don't know, it's just a word. But rather than that, it's more of just you're incorporating all of that. All of that. It's more of the totality, the known. We're also including the unknown, and in a very light, not going to really mess with it way, we're interacting with the unknowable. So we take that aspect and we just expand it. So we still have our eyes on whatever we're doing. That's a type of narrow aperture, but because we're doing this throughout our day, this is embodiment. I'm not just sitting here on a meditative mat, doing this. I'm talking to a customer at work while I'm doing this. So it's a feeling. And so eventually all of these techniques of imagination and these different perspectives and things like that, you still have the ego, but you're also everything else, and so that balances, right? It's not just narrowly focusing on one. Again, if we want to just narrowly focus on spirit, and then that's all we do, you're going to have a hard time interacting with your life experience. That's not necessarily balanced. Maybe there's a future humanity that doesn't create all the bullshit that we do, so they're doing different things. But we live in this fucking world, so we have a lot that we have to adapt to. And so it's unreasonable to think that we're just going to at all times be focused on one thing or the other, right? So we're focused on both. That's embracing the opposites to create a third thing: power, balance. So I have an ego, but I'm also the infinitely unknown and unknowable, and I'm going to embrace both of them, which I think is a completely different, and so I'm not going to subtract or take away or anything like that, which is subtract is take away. But yeah, so in what I'm explaining now is wrapping up the practice. And then that's relative because that's what I was doing this week. So when I was experiencing challenges, when the dog was shatting on the floor, I still felt connection to oneness. So I was able to just do. I just picked up the shat and just do. No, I don't want to. No, it wasn't. There was nothing good about it. It shat on the floor. It smells terrible.
The comments in the group chat were pretty awesome as well.
Oh yeah, shit happens. It does. Yeah, and that's kind of where the giggles about situations like that, the Buddha, giggle thing can come from, is because we can just laugh at certain things at a certain point. It's not a big deal, right? So the reason I mention this is because all of this especially this
I
capstone.
believe it's called shite in Ireland.
Shite, really?
In Irish.
Shite. I don't have a good Irish accent, but yeah.
Yes, shite, shite, shite.
Okay. That's weird, but I believe you. But the kind of the moral of the story is that this triangle with that capstone is showing deliberate modulation, sensing energy, and when that is all active, you are supremely adaptable because you're aware more of the totality of know thyself, which includes the present moment, which includes the feeling of the connection to totality, which includes the feeling of connection to the underlying quality of the present moment underlying. Does that make sense? And that's how I adapted through the situations, you know, not being able to go to work. I'm not going to think dumb shit because there's just so much unknown, you know. I don't know how people are going to perceive this or yada yada. I'll just do my thing and, you know, be as honest and genuine about everything as I can, and I'll take responsibility for all of my own variables, and that's the best I can take account for is my intentions and my attention, which leads to my behavior. So that's what I take responsibility for. And there was a lot of challenges for me because like Tuesday I did the class and then I had to go to work for 8 hours. I didn't know if the dog was going to, I was going to say it in Irish, but I don't know how, but he was going to shite, I don't know. He was going to make poopy on the floor. And I don't want to think about those things. That's not going to benefit me. Instead, I'm going to connect to the universal oneness, which I am. So if anything, we're taking a lot of the shit that's talked about on the internet and we're making it an active point of attention. Isn't that fun? Absolutely. Right, Jerry. It's not all about me, is it? A previous version of Ernest would have got mad. I would have been angry at Neo. I would have been somehow mad at Shayna. Like, it was her fault, you know. She left. It made him anxious. Damn it. Never doing this again. I did say we're never doing it this way again. We need a better plan, and I think we'll have a better plan next time. All right. Any questions, comments, or concerns? The thing I will say though is that there's a lot that leads up to this. We still have warrior training or counterbalance and warrior training, which has a lot of learning to adapt to the present moment. But Ida, as you and Donna and others, you guys can imagine or you've experienced, counterbalance is different than what I'm talking about right now, because we've never stopped connection to the present. So it's technically not counterbalance because we never lost our point of attention. Counterbalance is when we lose our point of attention to the present moment. We are at odds with the moment because there's interference. So in the example that I'm giving, this is what we do with our non-interference. We create, we connect, we feel the connection, which I would say is the word, and I use this very sparingly, love. You feel that love with the moment itself. And then before you know it, all this bullshit that people are talking about, you're actually feeling. And you're like, wow, like this is life. Like this is more important than anything that I could possibly have, because I can have everything under the sun. Think about all of your desires, those physical desires, the ordinary desires, job, family, wants, you know, things, stuff, whatever it is. Think about arriving with all of those things, but with a mind that is still a leaf at the mercy of the wind. What good is all of that? Like what would be the point? I can't even fathom it anymore. Why would I want anything before peace? That doesn't make any sense to me at all.
And information alone doesn't bring peace.
Oh no, and too much information can bring quite the opposite. There has to be something we do. There has to be an active element, and that's what Qigong is. Qigong is mind, intention, exercise. That implies active attention and intention on the present moment. I leads Qi. The direction of our mind will lead the energy, which is conscious creation, which is the law of attraction. I don't like that word, but it's everything that we've been talking about, but we have put it into a way that a person can do it. If they don't do the practice, I got nothing. I got a bunch of theory, but people already know that shit. And what they don't know, they're not easily to accept, such as the overall volume of thought. A lot of people don't like the sound of that. They're like, well, how do I solve problem? I have to think all the time. What else would I be doing? I have to look at my cell phone. I have to, do something or I'll get bored. It's like, you'll get bored. You have 1,000,000,000 times 1,000,000,000 synaptic connections all available to you. You're exploring the infinitely unknown. You are the universe experiencing itself as a carbon-based human form of cognition. Isn't that fucking cool? And you have the audacity to be bored because there's nothing on TV? What the hell are we talking about? Okay. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Anything I could clear up about any of that? And I did mention that, Ida, because I felt like this would be helpful because of the things that you're adapting to as well. Because I really do feel like, I mean, I don't know for sure. We haven't had a one-on-one in a while, but I feel like you are getting much closer. Let's look at this in the time flux. We can look back and see when we weren't holding any points of attention. We can look at where our practice is now, and we are holding it much more than before. We can only assume that that dynamic will continue, and I'll be holding my points of attention more and more and more until I'm 110, and I'll be doing this. So, but I would say that I have started to identify, which is one of the reasons that I'm mentioning these aspects of the practice, is because I think it will be beneficial. I think that very soon we'll be able to just modulate to the feeling of oneness, of connection, of freedom, which is a great feeling. I mean, it feels really great to be free from, ultimately, you're feeling the freedom from your own interference. And that also implies the 4 and 5 destroyers.
I was going to say that would be a great habit to have, but it would never be a habit.
Well, see, that's the thing, is our mind is always creating habits.
Yeah,
It just
well,
does.
so the habit of modulating to peace.
I just don't think that's that's not a habit. Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. That I can't imagine. It's like breathing. Deliberate breath can never become a habit.
It's more momentum,
It gets
accumulation, momentum.
Yeah.
It's similar. It's parallel to habit, but it's not the same.
Yeah, it's like muscle memory. Must be like spirit memory, like remembering your spirit every day instead of drowning it and outside.
It's existing above the threshold of recognition,
That's it. Literally, that's it. It is your attention, which implies intention. They go together, whether we like it or not. They don't always, and that's in the most dysfunctional minds, but that's a different story. And well, that's actually in most minds too, because most minds are quite dysfunctional. And I don't mean that to be, negative. It's just a statistical.
I understand what you mean. You mean more interference and less interference.
Yeah.
Less interference is more functional. More interference
far more functional.
Is efficient and less efficient. Let's say it that way, and it's less.
There you go.
It's less judgmental.
It's not, because it's not an opinion. You can look at this and determine, based on the derivative of the human experience, we can see that there is a lot of psychological suffering. We don't need to debate that. We could create scientific experiments to prove it, but we would be wasting our time because it's empirically evident to every single person on earth.
I know what Ida's saying, though. I find when I look at it like existing above the threshold of recognition as opposed to a leaf at the mercy of the wind, if I am engaging my moments, embodying my moments in that way, then my life is more functional, more desirable, there's more appreciation, there's more connection, there's more love, it's more preferred. It's just as simple as that. I prefer the feeling of existing in as many moments as possible and embodying the practice. It's worth every minute of attention that I must give it. It is worth the action, the work. It's worth the work, if you call it work, because it has no negative connotation to me, of doing it as opposed to not doing it.
Right.
And that's it. You're either doing it or you're not, and it feels better to do it. And it's an ever-growing, evolving creative experience when you're doing it, and it is more of a stagnant, reactionary, less desirable experience when I'm not doing it. And that's it. It's not better, worse, it's not higher, lower, it's not, it's just preferred.
Right.
If I ever get that tiny wee inkling of boredom, that frightens me. Not frightens, but I can sort of feel that, you know, like if I thought about it from the world's point of view, from the common mind point of view, I'm a woman painting things in a shed. You know, I'm not flying all over the world going, you know, if I went down that route, going on all these exotic holidays and I don't have fabulous clothes and, you know, all these things, I don't allow myself to go there anymore, but I used to. And I used to have FOMO big style of people who were doing all these exotic things, where now I find that if I populate my perception, my bubble, and really look around me at what I've got going on around me, it would take me 100 years to explore it all. And I know that now. And that's a great feeling to know that I'll never be bored.
Yeah.
Unless I choose to.
And
And I won't ever choose to.
right. Why would you choose to be bored? That's
know.
weird. And you know, this isn't a judgmental statement either. It's again, it's empirical, but you can notice, what's a good way to say this? Sometimes what is actually a prison for a person's mind looks like a desirable vacation destination, right? You look at the vacation destination of somebody's life experience. Maybe they're a social influencer, maybe they're rich, maybe they're a CEO of a very big company. And we look at that and we're like, that's it. That's what I want, right? Look at that. Look at all the stuff they have. Look at all the opportunities they have. Look at all the things they can do, all the things they can experience, right? They can jump out of airplanes, or they can go to exotic or not exotic. You know, they can do anything they want, right? Because they have freedom. So we look at that as, wow, that's a really pretty, you know, lawn. I really like the way all of that looks. But from this practice, I'm sure that you can start to see how that actually becomes a prison. Why? Because if there's a level of attachment to it, which would be up to the individual, everybody's a little bit different. That's the human nature, is to be self-centered and want more. It's true. But we can start to see that the attachment is the prison, because if you can't have or not have, you don't have true freedom. You know, freedom, the way that I use that word, is the freedom to have something or not have something and still feel free. But also, when you start to embody the principle of balance, the desire for out of balance is less desirable. So I look at things and I don't feel balance. That's me. You know, that wouldn't be relative to another person's life. Maybe somebody was born a monk, maybe somebody was born a multi-billionaire. So having a $60,000 car for them is like, you know, walking in shitty shoes to them. So I don't know. I'm not saying one thing or another. I'm saying the ability to have or not have and still feel free. But a lot of those folks are, you know, that are creating what looks like a nice place to be, a nice vacation of the mind, a nice situation. It's just another type of prison, because they can't have or not have. If it's threatened or removed, they will fight and even kill to defend it. That is the definition of severe psychological suffering and dysfunction of the human species, is to be so attached to a condition or a desire or a situation that we would be willing to kill one of our own species to fight and defend it. And it's still insanity to want to take it away from somebody else and fight and I want it and me, I. That is all wild dysfunction of the human species. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And in the opposite end of that, I can still find appreciation in fashion. I could still find appreciation in Shayna's pictures of Germany.
Sure.
And I don't need to, and sometimes it inspires you towards something. And that's how an individual interprets their life experience. You know, some fashion thing that I see is really appealing to me for whatever reason, but I end up with a planter in the colors of that outfit, and I put a little plant in it and I put it out on my deck, and I got it in job lot for, or I paint it with some paints that I have around the house in the colors that I never thought would look so beautifully together. And then I'm satisfied. And that fashion, I didn't need to own it to have the experience of what inspired me about it. Or the textiles, I like the textures and the mixture of the textures, and I find placemats that do that for me, or whatever, I don't know. It somehow, the appreciation is what's important. And the appreciation is what I desire, and it points me toward connection, but it doesn't mean I have to own it and have it. And it's okay that they own it and have it. And they may or may not be happy because of it. There's nothing to do with it, really.
Yeah.
It's like the techniques. It's like the techniques. The techniques that I pick have inherently no value in and of themselves, other than the feeling that I derive from it, and whether it's pointing me toward that piece. It is pointing me. It is a tool in which I use to embrace the space and to exist above the threshold of recognition. The technique itself has no inherent value. Feeling my socks on my feet doesn't have any inherent value, other than I'm engaging my senses, and that brings me closer to everything that I want to achieve, that we just discussed in this class.
Mm-hmm.
Not even achieve. I just want to live in that space.
I know what you mean. All right, yeah, I think that's good. So I'll post this with the other video. I have the next couple days off. Shayna and I are probably going to need some rest. Yeah. Hunting power topic is next. I don't know. Yes. Hunting power is next. Hunting power, the hydrostatic effect, the act of alignment, which we did just talk about, because the act of alignment is the connection. That is what the definition of you're connected to the moment, moving as it's moving, adapting, non-interference, conscious creation. And then before you know it, everything is exactly where you put it. Your desire is aligned with your intelligence, and you don't need your life to look at how anybody else's or anything else, because you're just doing your own damn thing. I'm giving an example of that. I discovered acupuncture, and acupuncture discovered me as a career by going with rather than against. And we talked about setting up 2 different resumes and then seeing which ones I got things back from. And I experiment a lot with the human experience because I find it interesting, and I learn more from it. But I'm not saying I'm perfect, and I'm not going to because I'm going to experience challenges, and I'm going to have moments where I could have been more elegant, and I'll always have opportunities to learn, and I'll always be able to create new habits, and I'll need to be mindful and present enough to observe when those habits are gaining too much momentum and they're taking me out of balance, and I need to come back. So there's no better than dynamic, but I am putting everything exactly where I want it. And it is the way it is, so I have found that a lot of the desires and things that I'm involved in now feel closer to that oneness than they used to be. They used to feel closer to the 5 destroyers. My desires now don't. They don't have the heavy I and me and self, and I'm not really looking at things that way. That's not how I create. But I will see everybody again on Tuesday for Hunting Power. I'll post these videos. If you have questions, just let me know. I'll have a couple books here ready for you soon. Yeah, that's all. All right, I will see you guys again soon. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Ernest. Welcome home, Shayna.
You're
Bye.
welcome.
Thanks.